Welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer's Speaks. I'm thrilled you can join us today. We're going to be talking today about how do you be a mindful caregiver. And we have a wonderful expert with us, Nancy Kriseman, who is a social worker and who specializes in geriatrics. And she's been doing this for more than 30 years. So her experience with counseling and consultation and training family caregivers is going to be wonderful. She also has a couple of books we'll be talking about that can assist you as well. But before I introduce you to her, I always like to, again, point out Alzheimer's Speaks has a ton of free educational resources. Doesn't cost you any money. You don't have to subscribe. You can watch, you can read, you can download, whatever your preference is. But just go to our free educational resource tab at alzheimersspeaks.com. You can also visit our sister company, Dementia Map, which has resources around the world that can help support you as well. Again, free access 24/7. Neither of these companies are going to bother you or pester you. That's not our goal. It's all about connecting and helping you through the process. So with no further ado, let's introduce you to Nancy. Well, Nancy, I am so excited to have you back on the show. It's been quite a while since you were on last, and I can't wait to hear what you've been up to. And I know you've got this new edition rolling out and so forth with your book. So I'm going to have you go ahead, if you don't mind, introducing yourself to our audience.
Sure. So my name is Nancy Kriseman. I am a social worker, geriatric social worker. Have been in the field of aging 40 years, believe it or not. And I've written 3 different caregiving books in the eldercare field. I have a very major passion for older people, and in particular people that are living with dementia, and trying to help them feel better about their lives, even though they're losing some of their cognition. They don't lose their heart, as I always say. And how do we tap into the spirit and the heart of people with dementia? And then having a mom midway through my career who was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's brought me up close to this whole thing, not only just working with clients, but also, having to be there for my mom and how to stay connected to her.
Did you find that different for you compared to the advice you give, your clients?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I'll tell you what I noticed the most was that it was very easy to become impatient with her and frustrated at times. And I would say to my clients, people that have cognitive impairment, often they're not able to remember what they've just said. And yet, I would say, no, don't tell them, Mom, I just told you that. But then I found myself saying, Mom, I just told you that, and that sort of upset me some for myself, because I realized basically that the emotional part of traveling with somebody who has dementia is not easy. And it really brought it to home for me when my mom had, her dementia, which she lived with for almost 17 years. It's hard to believe.
That's interesting when you talk about that kind of emotional part, because when we talk about disease, we don't talk about that. I don't care what kind of disease it is. That's kind of, pushed in the back, and we're looking at all the physical symptoms and things and the tasks to do, because that's in my mind, that's the easier stuff to do typically. It's black and white. You either did it or you didn't. But that emotional stuff, you have to dig inside and go, okay, I'm off track a beat here. I can do better. How do I do better? And then the self-forgiveness too, when you do screw up and, you snap or, whatever it might be. We all carry around that baggage of guilt of not doing our best. And I think typically for most people, and you might disagree with me, and please do, but I think most of us feel guilty more over that emotional care than the physical care that we're giving.
Yeah, I would say to you, I used to say to my clients, and I have it in my book too, I talk about how guilt can hold you hostage.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's very hard, like when you have, say, a couple and one has dementia and the other doesn't in the couple, and the person who has dementia really needs now to be in a memory care because it's just becoming way too hard for the 80-year-old person to care, spouse to care, and the enormous amount of heart-wrenching guilt which is why I find that people don't make decisions. They just wait and wait to the last minute because they feel so incredibly guilty.
I totally agree with you on that. And I see that all the time. I'm dealing with that personally in my own family right now, where they would not make the decision to even do, their wills. And I mean, it was just, and it's such a flippin' mess. It's just ridiculous. And it didn't have to be this hard.
Lori, it makes me think about, part of the reason I was so excited about having the opportunity to write a second edition of The Mindful Caregiver, which, the first one came out in 2014, was there were two chapters in particular that I felt needed full chapters. I mean, I made some reference to it in the first edition, and that is dealing with resistance and dealing with resilience. And in my private practice over the years, I dealt with so much caregiver resistance from, the family caregivers resisting, not agreeing with what should be the type of care that the parent needed, and the spouse resisting, not wanting to move a person or not wanting to bring in home care, whatever it might be. And then I realized that caregivers needed some help with resilience as well. And that in order for them to do good self-care, I have to help them, give them some ideas about how to be a more resilient caregiver. So I was excited to have the opportunity, to put those two chapters into the new book.
Yeah. Well, and I think resilience is tied so much into hope. And that's not something that we hear. I mean, we're hearing a lot more of it now than we did, 20 years ago, even 5 and 10 years ago. But we still have a long ways to go, that you can still live a good life. You can still have balance. And yeah, you're going to get out of whack, but you got out of whack before dementia or illness hit you. That's just life,
Exactly.
And then you kind of get on the bike and you start pedaling again. And for some reason, people, I think we've been taught, no, you're just going to be stuck. This is where you're going to stay. There's no off ramp. There's no getting back on. There's no, and I'm like, how do we get there? And to me, and again, this is just my personal belief, I think we got there because it made money. It got people to donate. It created fear. And you need our help, so donate money. And again, not everyone believes that. I believe it deeply because it's not a natural thing to all of a sudden just not have hope or not believe. I mean, when there's an illness, because all of our life, I believe we've pretty much been resilient. We've gone through many, many stages in our life, and we've broken through them all, good, bad, or ugly. We got to the other side. And I think that's our natural process. I think it's our natural inclination to do, but it's so it's been so heavy and so people feel so pushed down, I think sometimes in hopeless. And the only thing that I can tie it to is the marketing. I mean, I see it on TV with all the different ads and how, you know, not just with illness, but with so many things, people buy in to that whole marketing piece. And they can't live without this, or they can't live without that, or they're not good enough without this or that. And I really do think a lot of it has to do with how we market and how we talk about different things in our life in all aspects. And
Absolutely. And you know what else, Lori, that I think is super important for the caregivers is for them to hear how they are resilient. To really spell out for them the different ways that they're resilient. Because I think sometimes they don't even realize it, they don't realize how that they're really doing a pretty darn good job.
yeah,
And helping them get away from feeling like they have to make right decisions, and helping them, get into this place of, you make the best decision that you can based on your life experience right now and what's going on. And really, so I really spend a lot of time trying to help the caregivers recognize that the good things they're doing.
absolutely. And I think that's one of the importance of even support groups and stuff too, because I'll never forget in one instance, we had a couple, and they've given me permission to tell this story. And the wife had dementia, and she just wanted to leave early. Come hell or high water, she was getting out of there. And her husband was graciously trying to calm her down, and she did not want to. And so they moved out to the car, but by then she didn't even want to go out to the car with him, And he felt so bad, because I walked out to the car with him and I said, John, that is not what everyone is saying in the group. They are amazed at your graciousness and
Yes.
how caring and how loving. And you did not raise your voice once. And you kept coming back, trying different angles to, they were in awe of you. And he didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And so being able to be our vulnerable selves in a safe place, or talking with a counselor or consultant like you, it's massively helpful, because we do have our blinders on, and I think our inner critic just blabs in our ear way too much of what a crappy job we're doing, and we should be a better person. And we have to kick that person to the curb and kind of go outside our body and look at what all we have accomplished. And, one of the tough things I think with dementia too is there's always something next, and so you forget about all the stuff you've come through. But if you sit back and reflect, I think most everybody's pretty shocked at what they've been through. And then if you have the ability to share that story, and like you're helping people through your book or your books, that's massively important, because I firmly believe we can learn by others' lessons, and some of that isolation that is pent up in us. So I really want to talk about, your second edition. Again, I love that in this one, it talks about the resistance, and it, and some people might call that denial. There's different words in terms of how you can view that. And then the resilience of, you will make it through this, it's, and I think for me, and I don't know if this was part of your resilience talk, but for me, getting over some of my resistance was learning to look at it as a lesson to be learned. And when I finally, and I didn't get that right away. My mom lived with the disease for 30 years. But when I finally got to that point of asking the question, what is it I'm supposed to learn? Oh my gosh, that changed everything on how I approach. But I did not get there until I had a screaming match with God, one day when I lost it as a caregiver. I got everybody out of the house. I closed the window. I went in the basement and I just screamed at God going, I need help. I don't know what's going on here. I'm assuming there's a lesson wrapped in here, but you got to drop me some clues because I am not seeing it at all, And what I found, and I don't have to scream and yell anymore, I can ask nicely, but what I found was anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 days, it became so clear to me. Never over 2 days. It just came clear for a path for me to maneuver this. And again, I had to get over the aspect of I'm not going to fix it. I'm going to support it. I'm not going to make it go away, but I'm going to make life better for all of us.
Yeah, and I think with resistance, what I've found too with a lot of my caregivers that I worked with over the years, is that there's a certain amount of control that we all want to have and expect to have. And as you were saying, as we get older, we're realizing that we have the only control we have is how we think about our situation and how we manage it. And the more you can recognize that for yourself, then it's a little bit easier to not fight some of the resistance. And what I see with a lot of my elder folks that have dementia is they know that they're having cognitive issues. I mean, they do, and so they're trying to hold on as long as they can to who they are and were. And that's where some of that resistance comes about. And so the more you argue with them and tell them, that they're doing it wrong or they're not remembering correctly or whatever it might be, all that does is cause more angst and disturbance for them, and for you too, for that matter.
Yeah, I've gone through that specific issue right now with a loved one who passed, and it was her husband, and she's got dementia, and people like, how do I answer? Where's Tom? And so, I don't want somebody looping if they're going to be devastated, and
Right.
just they're dead, they're gone. And some people, that's how they talk after a while. They're just tired of answering that question. I would never have somebody loop. My mom was one of those that would loop, and that wasn't healthy for her, and she would just go through the whole grieving process all over again.
Yeah.
But with this person, she's like, oh, thank you. I knew something was wrong. I kind of thought that. This is really helpful. And she just wanted to be reassured that she was part of the process. She couldn't remember if she went to the hospital. She didn't really remember if she was at the funeral. And so we talked in great detail about all of those things and how they communicated and how they were able to tell each other that they still loved each other, and the importance of conversations, and even the music choices and stuff for their favorite songs together. And she was just so peaceful. But I think people are so afraid of some of those conversations. We had the same thing in terms of talking about healthcare directives, and her husband said, oh, she's not going to be able to do that. I had a much better conversation with her than I did him, because he didn't want to deal with end of life. And she knew exactly what she wanted. That was a very important conversation for her. And again, she thanked me for going through all that with her. She's like, no one's ever talked to me about this stuff before.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been asked that question, a lot. Do you tell somebody who has dementia that their spouse died or their sister died or whatever? And my feeling is just like you. One, I think you should always, the first time they should know. And then, if they don't remember, and they ask, why isn't my sister visiting me or whatever it might be, then what I usually do is say, tell me about your sister. Let's talk about, what memories do you have? And I sort of talk about her almost as if she's still alive in a way. But I do think it's important to not keep on, you don't want somebody to keep on regrieving and regrieving. I mean, that's just very painful for people.
And everybody's different. And,
That's true too.
I'm going to say it different than you're going to say it. So that could make a difference in terms of how they're going to
Sure,
react. So we have to know that. We have to know ourselves as well.
sure.
Because there are some people in the family that can have that conversation and others that just can't. And part of it,
Right.
their grief is still too heavy for them. And they feel like they're being brought back to loop over and over and over again through those questions. And that, of course, is not her intent, but that's how they grieve. And so everybody kind of goes through that process a little bit different.
And they may hear it differently from, say, a minister or a rabbi or a physician than they would even, from the family member. They
Yeah,
might hear it, in a different way, in a more helpful way in some ways.
exactly, exactly. Well, I wanted to talk to you because the title of your book is The Mindful Caregiver. What does that really mean? To you, what does that mean? I mean, I know what it means to me and everybody in our audience. I mean, some people might think, oh, this is a woo-woo book, it's talking about mindfulness, and others are really starting to embrace kind of, in my opinion, that holistic, healthy side of care, because caring is something that we do every single day, all of our lives, and we have since from the day we're born till the day we're die. That's how I view it. And just because you have an assigned title now, what does that really change, and how can mindfulness help? So if you want to kind of define that. And
It sort of just popped in my mind when I started to realize that being a caregiver takes a tremendous amount of planning, intention, pausing, not just jumping into things. And what mindfulness does is it allows you to step back a little bit and to get your mind quiet so that you can listen more in some ways to your heart and what it's trying to say to you. And it helps you to get more in touch with how your whole body is feeling, you know? And so for me, the idea of being a mindful caregiver is, with intentionality, with making sure you stay in the present moment, that you give yourself that opportunity to slow down. I think that what I find is that caregivers are often like on this rat wheel, they're just constantly running, 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 and doing, doing, doing. And sometimes some of our better decisions really come about from staying still and being mindful and asking yourself what do I really need to do to take better care of myself and to take better care of the person I'm caring for, and to realize that I can't do this by myself. I mean, that's the biggest takeaway that I feel so very important, is getting that circle of support around you. And you're not able to do any of that until you slow down. And that's really what mindfulness is about.
yeah, I totally agree, and I'm fully in on that. I don't do it perfectly all the time, but I don't do anything perfectly all the time. So
Nobody does.
so perfect is one of those words. As I was caring for my mom with dementia, my dad with brain cancer, I kicked to the curb because it got in my way. And it was a good way to procrastinate. It was a good way to beat myself up, and I didn't see it as a positive word anymore. And I switched to progress. Instead of being perfect, I just want to progress. I want to try to do better every time.
Yep.
And that led me to consciously care and really look at my steps and how are they reacting to me, and how I loved when you talked about getting quiet so you could get back to the heart and then really understand what's going on with your own body. But I think when you do that, you become much more conscious of their multi-sensory reactions to our multi sensory reactions, because that's what 90%. 80% of our communication is not words.
Exactly.
And that whole quieting of the mind, it allows you to hear things and receive things that you wouldn't have processed before because you're just too busy being busy. And when I had my yelling match with God, I mean, that's what I was doing. I'm typically a type A personality. I got plans A through Z. You're not going to catch me. I got a plan for everything. And then all of a sudden, zoom, it comes up in a different form. And then you got to stop and you got to replan. And then I realized I'm distracting myself by making these plans, knowing darn well when something happens, I'm going to have to make another plan and gather and use all the information I have in that moment. And the moment I'm making the plans, I have a limited amount. And, as time goes by, you gather more stuff. And so I allow myself to make max 2 plans. That's it. And really try to stay in the present moment, which I know had gotten a lot of, pushback over the years, but you can't create joy and you can't identify joy if you're not in the moment. So if you're living in the past and the grief of everything that you've lost or might continue to lose, or you're like me making plans for the future stuff that might never ever happen to you, you're losing critical time. And yet we're all complaining that we want more time. We want to live better. Well, then if you're going to live, you got to be in that moment. You do have to be mindful of where are you spending your time.
And I think, Lori, I think the other thing that Alzheimer's teaches us and dementia is learning to be in the present moment. Mm-hmm. Because people that have dementia don't remember oftentimes what they did, 2 minutes ago. And so being able to just appreciate and enjoy that time together and not get so, uptight about, oh my gosh, they're not going to remember that. My mother used to have this thing with me. She kept on telling me, you don't come and visit me. When she ended up, having to be moved into a nursing home, you never come and visit me. And of course, my initial reaction was, I was there 3-4 times a week, how can you say that to me? And then again, what I learned to do was just to say, Mom, I love you. And just leave it at that, and not get so caught up in all this other stuff with her, because it's so easy for us to get frustrated when they're not remembering the things that we have done. And caregivers, they give a lot of themselves, right? And then to feel that your family member isn't appreciative or isn't remembering all the things you've done, that's a hard one for people.
It is. And this had never occurred to me until you were saying it right now. But, there's that saying, live in their world. And I think some people can say, okay, I'll live in their world. And I am going to correct them that I am there. I'm going to get a calendar. I'm going to mark it off every time I come and how long I stay. And, and none of that is going to work. And so you have to know when to live in their world or how to live in their world, or, how to distract, how to reminisce. But to me, it's all about how do you calm them down? For me, I got really task oriented, and I ended up snapping at my mom one time horribly, and I couldn't let it go. She didn't remember it, that I yelled when I snapped when she repeated herself 40 times in 10 minutes, the same question, and I just didn't have the patience for it. And I ended up developing a tool called Your Memory Chip. And really all it does, and I interviewed people all around the world, both staff and families can use this, but really all it does is teach us to go from being task-oriented to being feeling-oriented. And so for me, before every interaction, I didn't care if it was on the phone, if it was in person, it didn't make any difference. On Zoom, I had to focus on, was she safe? Was she happy? Was she pain-free? No matter what list was in front of me, those were my goals. And when I focused on those 3 things, I did my tasks totally different. I found some of my tasks were on there to make me feel better because I wanted something for a disease that I couldn't control. And so that gave me a sense of control, but that's not caring for her. That was caring for me. And I didn't even realize that at all. But I think, if we get back to, we all want to feel good. We want to feel peaceful. We want to feel safe. And a person with dementia still wants those things too.
In the new book, I have the title of the second chapter is "Whose Need Is It Anyway?"
Oh, good.
And
Good title.
which is just so perfect. But I want to talk for a moment about feelings, and because I think that I don't know if you had this experience or not, but I did certainly with my mom, and I felt like I did with many of my clients. I kept on imagining, how it must feel to not be able to remember, and it was very hard. You talk about the emotions of having your own parent, like not being able to know how to toilet yourself anymore, or, the things that you always, could do for yourself that you can't do anymore. And I find myself getting caught up in feeling almost depressed about it, which is understandable. And I had to find, which is what brought me to this idea of the spirit side of caring. And what I mean by that is recognizing how am I, caring for somebody can be very depleting. It just can be. I mean, it's just the reality. It is, particularly somebody that has dementia, I think. But there can also be ways to fill our spirit around this. And it meant, as I said to people, I had to move I've always been task oriented, and I've always been kind of a serious person. And I had to learn how to be silly with my mom and laugh and we would make up these crazy rhymes. I'd lay in bed with her when she was no longer able to even get out of bed. And we would just make up these things, and laugh and sing. And so I wanted her spirit to still feel whole and not so depleted from her dementia. And I wanted mine to feel that way too. And so I had to think about who in my life fill my spirit and be around those people and not be around people that deplete me. So that was another really big piece of thinking about how to support people with dementia and their families, the whole spirit side.
I love that you mentioned the play aspect, because as adults, we don't play, not to the extent that our little kids do. And they look at someone or something, and that's all they think about is how do I engage? And they're not thinking of time frames and is it right or wrong, or
Right.
How do I have fun? And those creative wheels are spinning. And that was one of the most precious gifts I think my mom gave me, is she kind of forced me to learn how to play again.
Yep.
And I remember at the time I was selling real estate, and I had a phone and I had a pager, a couple of phones, all of those things. And I remember her looking at me one day and go, "Lori, you can just put those down, because all that stuff's going to be there when you leave here." And I just thought, but I can't. I always answer. She's like, "No, really, Lori, you need to play more." And I will never forget watching her, and I think my kid was probably about 3 years old, and they were sitting at the dining room table coloring together. And when I walked back into the room, they both held their pictures up, and you couldn't tell who was prouder, my mom or my 3-year-old. They were just beaming, and they were so excited, and they were so in sync. And I hear that level of joy from so many grandparents playing with their kids, but you don't hear that level of joy adult to adult so much. And especially when someone is sick, people are like, "Wow, yeah, you shouldn't do that. They're sick." And it's like, oh my gosh, having fun and laughter to me are like the glue of life. I mean, that's part of resilience and getting us through
Totally
stuff, is this love and this authenticity that we, relinquish to one another in that safe mode. And I don't think we talk about that stuff enough, and how critical it is, and then what it does, I think, physically, chemically wise, to our body. There's studies on laughter, there's studies on lots of different things, but that just playfulness and that ability to feel connected to somebody like that at that level. I mean, that has got to be getting our cellular mechanism just going bonkers inside. You know.
It's funny because I just came back from a long plane ride, and they had Lucille Ball episodes. I Love Lucy,
Mhm.
which was my mother's very favorite program. And we would sit and have olives, black olives, and out of a can and watch I Love Lucy shows and just laugh our heads off. And I was laughing my head off on the airplane. And I have to say, I'm sure people thought I was totally nuts, but that was my mother's gift. That I didn't care what people thought about me on the airplane. I enjoyed watching. And Lucy, the I Love Lucy shows. I think we should show more of those in some of our assisted living and dementia care. I mean, we need to allow our elders, we need to tickle them more.
Instead of just Price is Right. You see that in a
Yes.
lot of them like that. But again, you know, with Lucille
Exactly.
Ball or the Honeymooners, you know,
Yeah.
even Andy Griffith, you know, Fathers Knows Best. All of those things were just all heartfelt. They had meaning, you know, makes such a huge, huge difference. What would you say are some of the best ways for people to handle that resistance or denial when they're dealing with dementia, when they're just kind of stuck?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, I wish that I could just give somebody a shot and make it all the resistance go away. It doesn't, do that very easily. I think that the most important thing with somebody who has dementia is that you need to honor their what they're saying and what they're feeling. And, if they're whatever it might be, I mean, if they don't want to move, if they don't want to go to the doctor, whatever it is that they're resisting, to say to them, I imagine I hear you. I know you don't want to move, and I know you don't want to go to the doctor, and I'm honoring how you feel. And what you don't want to do is tell them how they should feel, or try to correct them, or fight the resistance. You have to kind of go with it a little bit. And sometimes like I had a client who was just on the verge. She was still able to understand what she was signing for healthcare power and financial power, but she didn't want to do it. And her daughter was trying to convince her, and was arguing with her. I don't need this. You're trying to take my money away. All these sorts of things. And what I did is I said to the adult daughter, I said, why don't you take her with you and you just do your own,
Mhm.
and not have her do hers, and start that way, just to start with. And then also, again, it's validating their resistance in a way. I mean, it's not trying to push it aside and, arguing with them. And that's the biggest thing that I see people do, honestly, is,
Yeah,
they're not realizing that the more you fight them and disagree with them and tell them they shouldn't feel that way, or, whatever it is, then the more they, resist.
exactly. Just like all of us would, you know,
Yeah,
we want to be
exactly.
heard.
Totally.
And I mean, I think of, you know, when people take away the keys, they think, oh, it's no big deal. I'm like, I go crazy when my car's getting an oil change. I mean, I don't like being without my car for the
Yeah.
20 minutes, and think forever when it's something you've done forever, where it's part of your being, or you're moving, you're losing your home. What does that, what does that mean? What's, you know, I think we just have to be much more conscious about their feelings and why, because like you said, most of them know that it's probably not safe to drive, but they need to know there's going to be alternatives there to support them to be able to get around, because what's
There is something, Lori, that I did develop, and I'm going to share it. And people have mixed feelings about it, but I still think it's an important concept. So I came up with this thing called compassionate deception.
Mhm.
And what that means essentially is that when you have somebody with dementia, not somebody that's not cognitively impaired, but when they are cognitively impaired, sometimes you have to almost make up like a white lie or a story if it's a matter of trying to keep them safe.
Mhm.
So, as an example, I had a client, and she absolutely was refusing to move out of her home. And so, what we did is you know, how you can sometimes with the car, you disenable certain aspects of the car so that the car won't start or whatever. Well, what we told her, the compassionate deception, and it was me doing it, it has to be a professional, not a family member. I basically said to her, "Oh, I was told that they're going to be needing to redo some plumbing in your house, and they're going to have to turn the water off for about 3 or 4 days. And so I found a really great place for you just to, like an apartment for you just to be in until the water goes back on." And the person was, "Well, I don't really want to have to, leave." And I said, "Well, you really need water, and so she kind of agreed with that. And that was the compassionate deception. And then once I got her into the assisted living community, I worked with the staff to try to get her more engaged right away. Like, she used to be a librarian. So I had her set up all the books in alphabetical order and all this kind of stuff, and it kind of got her more involved. And then eventually she was able to stay there and didn't even ask about going back to her apartment. But compassionate deception, it's for people who don't understand, don't have the insight, the executive functioning of their brain is not working so well, and they're not safe to be where they are.
Mhm. Yep. And that safety has to come first. And
It
it's
does.
and it's crushing for everyone, but it's so, so important to put that first. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about for our audience, it's always nice if they get like 3 tips for evaluating communities, because everyone says they're a shining star. Even terminology they use can change from one to another. And it can be a confusing process to families on how do I sort this out? How am I evaluating apples to apples, or am I apples and oranges all the time? It's overwhelming and it's exhausting, and then I think some people just give up and go, I can't make this decision because I can't sort it out.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, they're popping up memory care programs, and communities are popping up all over, as are assisted living, et cetera. And so it's a little tricky when here's how I feel about memory care in evaluating it. The first thing I do is I suggest to families, you know, ask them to tell you a little bit about the type of program that they're offering. What are the activities that they're trying to engage the folks that are living, the residents that are living in the memory care? Um, and so you want to hear that they're not just rolling a bunch of yarn in a ball. You really want to hear that they've got a lot of music going on. They're doing some cooking. I mean, I used to bring an electric skillet to when I was in charge of memory care programming, and we made French toast and all kinds of stuff. We made pancakes and different things that had smells and comfort of home, and crock pots and things like that. So I want to hear the type of programs that they offer. Do they offer anything at night? Or some of these memory care folks will put people to bed right after dinner, and I don't think that's a good thing to do. Even though we know that sometimes sundowning occurs later in the day and people are more tired, but it's nice to know that there's some sort of program, even if it's just listening to some music or watching a little program on television or something that's funny, or maybe some YouTubes of animals that they can watch, funny YouTubes of children. So I like to know a little bit about is there a dedicated program director in the memory care, or that's in charge of the activities, and then a dedicated LPN that's in charge of paying attention to the physicality of the folks, the medical stuff that's going on for them. Sometimes what they'll do, the memory care is like the stepchild. And I found that to even be the case with food, which was very disturbing to me. Because people would say, well, they don't even know what they're eating anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter. And, I remember with my mom, my mother loved mashed potatoes. I mean, she was great at making garlic mashed potatoes. And when I went to visit her, they had given her tater tots on her plate. And next to her was a resident that had got mashed potatoes. And my mother was literally staring at those mashed potatoes. And so I went and I said to the nurse there, I said, why did my mother not get mashed potatoes? And they said, because she doesn't know how to use her fork anymore and spoon. And so she'd be eating with her fingers. And I said, so what? I mean, honestly, there's a point where if she's enjoying that, I want her to have the joy of eating her mashed potatoes, and then I want them to clean her hands up. I mean, she was in memory care where other people had dementia. It wasn't like people were saying, "Oh, you're not eating, you're eating with your fingers." And so those are the kinds of things that really mean a lot to me when I ask the question of, what happens when people aren't able to feed themselves. I can't stand these feeding tables, where you've got this one caregiver feeding like 6 people all at once. And there are other ways to do it in a more compassionate way. And so those are the kinds of things that I like to have family members, what does the unit, when you walk in, what does it feel like? What's the spirit? Do all the residents look like their heads are down? Do they look clean? I always look at fingernails, their hair. I mean, those are the things that tell me that the staff are paying attention to the people in their memory care. They're not just bodies.
What I find really hard these days, and I'm looking right now at this whole situation, is it used to be, and again, please correct me if you feel I'm wrong, but it used to be that a company's name and reputation you could trust for good care. And what I found nowadays, especially since COVID, it's all about who's on staff. And that is like a rotating door. And a company's name who used to have a great reputation doesn't necessarily have a great reputation. In fact, most of them, I hate to say, don't. If you look at the overall ball and talk to people out there, families aren't feeling satisfied with the services out there. They can name the staff people that they feel are comfortable with. But one of the other things that I hear all the time from even the staff within these communities is they won't get rid of the toxic staff person, and it runs off the really good, compassionate staffers. And I saw that in play when my mom lived in a community, and she was there 14 years, and 11 of those years were fantastic. I was their biggest raving fan. And then they lost 3 staff on one unit all at once. Yeah. They were all really good friends. And, they were off, still going to be in healthcare, but had different positions elsewhere. And no one had the foresight and the fortitude to pick their brains on all the knowledge that they had for all their residents. And they never, ever recuperated in the remaining 3 years of my mom's life. And it was miserable there. I mean, it was like a night and day. And so that's what I find really difficult, because then once you place somebody, it's not like you can keep moving them around, because typically they'll decline every time you make another move, with them. And it's daunting in many, many ways, not knowing how long are these staff that I'm seeing that I feel really confident and comfortable in going to be here?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's disturbing to me about this whole industry, and it has not, it hasn't changed really, is that really the best care comes from the caregivers, period. And so which is why my first book that I wrote back in 2005 is called The Caring Spirit Approach to Eldercare. It was about embracing and empowering caregivers and telling them that they are the angels in the building, and renaming all the keeper of the house was the housekeeper, the guardian angels were the caregivers. We don't honor and value the caregivers. We don't pay it. We still do not pay them enough, and honestly, there's so much turnover. Everybody's buying everybody out. And so I think, to me, what's most important, and this is in my book too, is I have a whole chapter on advocating. How do you become a positive advocate and become a partner in care? So that, because you really, families will say, well, I'm paying $10,000 a month. They should be able to do all the care. And I'm saying to you, no, you're going to have to be involved to some degree. You're going to have to let the caregivers know that your mother likes to have her coffee in the morning. And if she doesn't get it right away, she's going to be a bear, the whole day. I mean, there are certain things that you have to partner with the staff. And I found that in all the years that my mom was at the nursing home, the caregivers really respected me because they knew that I wanted to help them. And what I mean by that is I wasn't changing my mother's briefs and things like that, but I was giving them their ideas, caring ideas, so that they would care about her just as much as they were caring for her. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I think also we don't appreciate our caregivers. We don't tell them thank you, or even picking somebody up going, gosh, mom looked great today, or she was so happy. We're not sharing some of those stories, or when we are around things that are happening, we need to share them with the staff, but staff need to share them with families too. And that drives me nuts because I understand how companies, in some ways have cut back on cell phone use and inappropriate photos. But you know what? There's a lot of great photos that could be shared that would pick up a family's day. It would build trust. It builds rapport. It just eases everybody's mind because it's not like, oh, the bad phone's ringing, something's wrong. I mean, because that's what you always think. She fell, they screwed up the med, she's in the hospital. I mean, that's where everybody's mind goes. Instead of, oh gosh, thanks for sharing that. That really brightened my day today.
Yep.
And those things take very little time to do, but they're so impactful. And I think we need to get companies to understand that much more so. And all of it can't fall on the poor activities director either to be able to push all that stuff out, though many of them really try. But even with that, I know my daughter worked for a company, and this isn't all companies, but the staff were supposed to bring the residents down, for the activity. She's supposed to prep it. She's supposed to put it around, put it up, take it down, get set up for the next activity. She was running and getting the residents, doing the activity, bringing the residents back. I mean, and what is realistic for one person to be able to do, or even two? We seem to have lost that team effort in so many companies, not just memory care, but in all businesses these days. Everybody's running around like an individual. That's not my job. That's not my job. And
well, one of the things that I did when I was working at one of the assisted living companies as their engagement director, I actually had each of the caregivers do an activity that they wanted to do with the residents. So we had somebody that did a drumming activity. We had somebody that was really good with arts and crafts, and so that the caregiver, one of the caregivers did a cooking thing, and it helped them feel more a part of, like they were doing something, not just only taking care of the physical part. Because I think when they see the emotional and the spiritual piece of people, then they are caring more for the spirit of the person, not only just their body. You know what I'm saying? And
Well,
so
it gives them
it's so
purpose.
important.
It gives them purpose and a sense of community. They're giving
Yeah,
back. And I know where my mom was at, we kind of ran into that too, where they weren't tapping into families, and families will donate their time, they'll donate contacts, they'll donate money if they have it. But you got to ask, you got to let them
yep,
know you need it. You got to let them know you're open to it. And sometimes that is also being open to hearing things you don't want to hear. And that was one of the gifts. And I'm just a strong personality. So I didn't really care if somebody wanted to hear it from me or not. I'm going to tell them what I thought.
yep.
And I remember the director going, oh my gosh, here she comes again. But we ended up being great friends and colleagues. And we did some really cool things, pulling together, a family committee. We ended up getting volunteers. We were able to make changes instantly in these family councils, because part of the problem is that they didn't want to do them, like many don't, or no one shows up because everyone just crabs. They're just complaining about stuff, but no one's there to fix stuff. And I'm like, okay, if you want me to run this, you have to allow me access to be able to fix these issues, because 99% of them are really simple to fix. But if nobody knows about them, they're not going to get addressed. And so
Exactly.
I said, I'll go ahead and I'll run the family council, but every month I want access to a different director. And I said, that's housekeeping, that's maintenance, that's food service, that's social services, that's the RN, that's activities, that's your front desk person. It is everybody. And he's like, well, no, we've never done that. I'm like, okay, then don't ask me to do it, because I won't. You don't really want to fix your issues. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, and then I gave him a bunch of examples, and they were shocked at how many little things, like, putting something up on the wall could be, can I, can't I? I didn't know I could do that. And the maintenance guys are like, well, we can do that in 2 seconds. Laundry, it was all the missing clothes and the missed up, mismatched things that happen. How do you get over that? I mean, it was incredible. And most of the directors said, I never heard about this. This is really easy to fix. But they really, because they never asked.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you get that sense of community, I mean, we ended up building a big waterfall and patio, and we had volunteers that were master gardeners, so they didn't have to hire that out anymore. There were people out there that just loved doing that stuff. And it was incredible, the stuff we were able to do, and it flowed simply, and there was just this sense of community, and there wasn't this, oh, here comes
Us
somebody.
against them.
Yeah, where staff are dodging families or families are dodging
Right.
staff.
We did, Lori, we have the Atlanta Botanical Gardens, and has a scarecrows in the gardens, and people, schools and businesses and all that can build a scarecrow, and then they have a contest. So I did one with Arborterrace, and what we did is, and I involved all the staff, and we made this big gigantic heart that was cut out of wood, and then we collaged it with pictures of all the residents.
Mhm.
And again, the caregivers helped with that, and so did the residents. And then we had 2 residents that we made these. um, they were made out of what's that pipe, the white pipe that you can buy at Home Depot or whatever.
Oh,
We
the
made, and
PVC.
we dressed them up. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I forget what it's called, but we took we made a head with the face of a resident, a male and a female, and then we took some of the clothes and we dressed them up, and we had so much fun, and we came in second place. And but it was so it engaged so many people in the community, the families, because they watched us as we were building these things, and the residents, and the staff. It was awesome. And it, like you said, it doesn't take it takes less time to get people more engaged than it does to keep them not engaged, with each other.
Well,
Oh
and it gets
gosh.
back to what we were talking about is, being in the present, actually
Yep.
getting people involved instead of worrying about, this disaster, this is bubbling over there. It's just like step in
Right.
and fix it, turn the heat down,
Right.
and put the music on. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, I can't believe we've been yapping for almost an hour here. I wanted to ask you about, in your book, you talk about the importance of finding meaningful ways to communicate. And I think we've shared a lot of those with us today, and, being able to spend time with somebody living with dementia. Now, you've developed an activity kind of grab and go box. Why don't we talk about?
Yes. Yeah, don't ask me how I came up with this either, but what I realized was that well, there was a woman in the community I was working in, and she did not ever want to go out of her room.
Mhm.
And she was just beginning to have some cognitive challenges. She was a retired school teacher, but I found out when I asked her daughter a little bit more about her, I found out that she had a love for birds. And so, of course, the first thing I did was I suggested that they put a bird feeder, real close to the her window so she could see, birds coming there. But then I realized that I'm going to put together a bird box. I'm going to put together a box with all these different things that are birds. Like I found a couple of little plush bird animals. I found Cornell has this wonderful bird book where you can press the different pictures of the bird, and it has the sounds of the
Mhm.
birds. And then I went to Michael's and I got a little birdhouse, and we decorated that together. And so I just these boxes, these grab and go boxes, the idea is to think about some of the hobbies and interests and things that people enjoy and bring it to them. And then, like a baseball box, that was a fun one to do. I had Cracker Jacks in there, and bag of peanuts, and a baseball mitt and a glove and a bat, and Detroit Tiger. This person was from Detroit. So I had the baseball cards, and then you pull these different items out, and you can talk with it brings back memories for people, and it's a great way of engaging and getting people to talk. And it's really wonderful intergenerationally because you can ask the grandkids to make the boxes.
Cool.
And, like I had a man who was really into tools, and he used to fix everything in his house and all. And so we put a toolbox together for him. And, and so it's just thinking about all the different things that you could put a baking box together. I mean, there's just a million different things that you can do, and you can get real creative with it if you want to, but it's a lovely way of spending time with somebody, and having the materials right there with you. So you're not just staring at each other and not knowing what to say or do.
Oh, that's nice. I know, with my family, some of them had a hard time engaging. And so one of the things like I would always do is I would always bring lotion with me because then I could
Yes.
massage my mom's hands and arms and legs and shoulders and stuff. My daughter would always bring fingernail polish and she would
Yep.
do nails. My brothers weren't so touchy feely. And so we got a CD with mom's music just to be able to push a button and play. And that
Yep.
made them more comfortable. I know some of the libraries have dementia friendly packages. Roseville, Minnesota actually started this called Memory Minders, and they're called different things in different libraries where people can sign them out. And they are usually there's a book for the caregiver. There can be a book or a game to engage and play with, and then there's usually a music piece. But I know like up north, where it's more rural area, they were doing a lot of stuff with plants. And so they'd have
Mhm.
gloves and just little teeny tools, and they'd give them a pot where they could, plant a flower or whatever, do some seeds and things. So they had some of the smells and the touch and everything
Yeah.
that they were used to there. So yeah, that stuff is endless, in what you could create for an individual. And there's so many cool things. Now, for your grab and goes, do you have those for sale, or do you just encourage people to
Uh,
about your
I,
stuff?
I wish. I mean, I've been trying to find a company that would be willing to make them for me. I actually just applied for an award for this group. I'm waiting to hear back if my Meaningful Connections book will get awarded, because it's got all the ideas for the grab and go boxes. But no, I haven't, outside of just, talking to families about how to make them
Mhm.
themselves. No, I don't, I just
Yeah.
don't have them.
Well, and it's nice to be able to customize them though too for families. Sometimes they just need that little lead of, "Oh, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know that would be helpful," or how meaningful this would be, and stuff. So we can all only do so much in our own little world, in
Yeah.
our own little world.
There's only so much time, and,
Yeah, well, I hope you win your award. That would be cool, to see. Well, anything that you want to stay wrapping up that we've missed at all?
I think the main thing, for me, the biggest takeaway, and this is particularly for people that are living, that either have dementia, or families that are trying to support people that are living with dementia, and that is just to always remember that the heart remembers. That it doesn't matter if the brain isn't able to remember, the heart does remember, and they feel, people feel. It's like when somebody loses their eyesight, their other senses kind of pop up for them. And I really believe that's the case. And we need to really, just because people don't have, it doesn't mean they're not intellectually still smart. They're just not able to bring that forward anymore. But thinking about how we can spend time with them from the heart. That's the way that's what I hope this world will embrace people that way.
I love that. And I think, if people look at how they engage with children, if you could just engage with somebody throughout their life at that level, but we get grown up and we kind of
Yeah.
throw some of that stuff aside. But boy, those are such precious memories. And you think about with a child, when we have engagement like that, sometimes we don't even know the impact we're having on them. And we hear it later on.
Yep.
You might hear it at a funeral where somebody shows up and says, "This person had a huge impact on me." And the whole family is like, what happened? But we're not thinking about the impact we're having on our elders, which is really, really sad to me, because there's
Yep.
still so much that they can give us. And I think I don't know if you believe this, but I do. I think they teach us to communicate in different ways that we didn't even know were possible. And even the really small communications, the depth of the meaning is like explosive in your body. I mean, it's just so powerful, and it might just be an eye opening, or a little giggle, or a
Yep.
smile, or a squeeze of the hand, but those things like melt your heart, and they penetrate, and they like don't go away. It's
Yep.
not the big flashy stuff.
In the 40 years that I worked in the field of eldercare, I think my most enjoyable job was when I worked as an engagement person, with people with dementia. I had so much fun, because I that's what I wanted to bring to that memory care, community, was fun for
Yeah.
everybody, and, anyway. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Nancy, it was wonderful. You want to give people your email address, and how they can get a hold of you?
You'll be getting a copy of this. So my email, is Nancy, Nancy Kriseman, Kriseman, at Comcast.net.
And then you're also on Facebook too.
I'm on Facebook,
Yep. So
and I've been trying to post and doing a fair amount of stuff around dementia as well, and just caregiving, in particular.
and I'll also put in the show notes the caring spirit approach to elder care, which is
Yeah, and then the Meaningful Connections book,
yep.
which this is actually one of my favorite books too, because it's simple and it gives, families all kinds of ideas on how to spend time with somebody in a more meaningful way. I mean, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 12 different activity categories to give
Okay.
folks, ideas about. So
Again, to our listeners, I want to thank you, and I ask you all to be a giver of hope. Like, click, and share. Not because I chase the numbers, I don't even look at them, but it's because there are people in your sphere of influence that need this information. And the more we can make things available, the easier it is for people to reach out and click on it when they're ready. To let them know that this is a common need and concern, and that there are resources that can help them out there. So thank you all for being part of our community. And Nancy, thank you for your work over the 40 years and your books, your knowledge. You've just been a joy to have on the show. And I really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.